Class, welcome back. As we wrap up lesson 11A, we will conclude this with takeaways that will be essential for the final exam. So continuing on with some of the application of the principles that we discussed, let's get into this. So we talked about indirect and direct damages with some of the applications. Now let's go into a further example of this. A fiber optic line servicing a business district and a residential neighborhood is damaged during construction. It will be out of service for a minimum of 1 week. What would be the direct and indirect damages? Well, we can think of the utility owner that has a cost of needing to repair that. But beyond that, there's also a loss of revenue for its business, and somebody has to compensate for that. These are one of the worst utilities in the world to hit because there's so much revenue associated with these fiber optic lines, and those would be the indirect damages. Let's talk about liability limitation and indemnification. A limitation of liability clause permits the contracting parties to reduce or eliminate the potential for direct, consequential, special, incidental, and indirect damages should there be a breach of contract. What does that mean? Well, you might have a clause as a professional that says, I will provide liability for the work that I design up to the value of my fee. So if your fee is $50,000, but there's some sort of a legal dispute that's in the millions, if you've got a limitation of liability in your contract to your fee, then you're only liable up to what you got paid, $50,000. Not all contracts work that way, but this is how a limitation of liability can work to your favor, that you just can't promise to pay the world back should there be some damage or issues. Now, indemnification is a tricky issue because this is where there's a transfer of liability from one party to the other. So oftentimes within a contract between, say, a city government and you, the consultant, the city government's going to ask you as the consultant to indemnify them for any of your actions. So if there's any legal aspects to your work that arise in court action, and it involves the city because cities have deep pockets, they've transferred that liability to you and you have to do the defense for them. Now, hopefully the indemnification clause has a little bit more explanation so you're not just indemnifying the city for everything. And sometimes those contracts exist and you have to be on the lookout for that. So the party accepting the liability must have the ability to manage the risk associated with the assigned liability. And remember the risks that we talked about in the earlier part of the class. So liability limitation and indemnification, remember it transfers liability from one party to the other. This will be an item on the final. Please make sure you understand it. Warranty and guarantee. So warranties and guarantees work together. So when you design something for a client, you're essentially guaranteeing that you have fixed their road problem, their utility issue, or whatever it is that you're designing. But a warranty is something that applies more to a duration of time for how that guarantee will work. This is kind of a longer way of describing it, as you can see on the slide, but I want to make sure that you understand the difference between guarantee and warranty. And a warranty has a much more extensive description because it ties in the guarantee aspects and what the pledge that's associated with that. What can we or should we guarantee, or what should we warranty? And stipulating this is important. It goes back to that scope of work and what is the purpose or our mission with this project. And so it depends on the level of studies and requirements. So if you design a building that's supposed to work with 500 people, but you can't get people in the door because you designed a narrow doorway, you have a problem and that needs to get fixed. If you have a roadway, the drainage system, and the runoff, rainfall runoff doesn't get to the drainage system because there's something that's been poorly designed, there is a performance problem and there's a guarantee that applies. Now we limit that to a certain period of time with the warranty, so they can't come back 50 years later and say, hey, you got to come back and correct this. There's a limitation of how long the guarantee is in place. So these are exercises that are more appropriate for us to go in class, but you can kind of see how we would describe the cost of a building, how that might be, and then what happens when the bids come in at a different price. What kind of clauses would cover this? And in this case, there would be a guarantee of a certain performance of cost that would apply. For another class exercise that we might do, we've looked at a number of contracts within your homework, and it might be understanding how these terms apply, which we've discussed in this lesson. And with that, let's go through the takeaways. So I want you to understand the technical contract processes or elements, know the professional standard of care, memorize it. What is negligence for direct and indirect damages? And understand that indemnification is a transfer of liability from one party to the other, and understand the difference between guarantee and warranty. And with that, we've concluded lesson number 11.